Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Intimacy Lab. I want you to take a breath right now and ask yourself something quietly, almost in a whisper. Have you ever sat across from a woman you loved and felt that there was something invisible between you, a distance that you couldn't name but couldn't ignore? Her smile was still there, but it felt thinner. Her affection, her stories, they all seemed just slightly rehearsed, as if they were part of a performance she no longer believed in. You see, unfaithfulness rarely begins with a betrayal of the body. It starts much earlier, often quietly, in the erosion of presence, in patterns so subtle that most men never even realize they're happening until one day it's too late. This is what we're going to explore together today. 5 hidden patterns all unfaithful women follow. Patterns that are not loud, not obvious, but consistent and almost universal, regardless of culture, class, or context. And this isn't about blame, this is about understanding. It's about recognizing the emotional undercurrents that often precede infidelity, so you can respond with awareness, not fear. So you can protect what matters most, your dignity, your love, your clarity. In this conversation, I want you to lean in, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. Because curiosity is the antidote to ignorance, let's sink even deeper into this conversation. You know, there's something fascinating about how connection can quietly change its texture, how warmth becomes polite distance, how affection becomes transactional, how the eyes that used to search for you now seem to gaze past you, almost looking for an exit. That shift isn't random. When a woman begins to drift toward infidelity, it is rarely a reckless leap. It is often a series of tiny recalibrations, subtle moves that most men miss because they're looking for dramatic signs. A phone hidden, a secret meeting, a lie exposed. But no, the patterns begin long before that. They begin in the erosion of emotional engagement. The first hidden pattern is emotional withdrawal disguised as busyness. It's a phenomenon we rationalize all the time. She says, "I'm just swamped right now," or "work has been crazy," or "I just need some time for myself." And you believe her, because that's what trust asks you to do. But beneath this busyness there's often something deeper. Her emotional energy is being redirected, either inward into her own dissatisfaction or outward into a connection she hasn't disclosed yet. This isn't about blaming her for needing space or having a demanding life. This is about noticing when the quality of that space starts to feel different. When "I'm tired" becomes the default response every night. When she no longer seeks your gaze at the end of a long day, when she fills her evenings with distractions that don't involve you, and seems relieved to have an excuse not to be close. What makes this pattern so insidious is that it looks so reasonable. We all have busy periods, we all retreat sometimes. So as a partner, you may convince yourself to be patient, to wait it out. But when that withdrawal persists, when it becomes a new normal, it's no longer just about work or stress. It's about her emotional detachment. The second hidden pattern is a subtle shift in how she manages privacy. And I want you to hear this very carefully. This is not about accusing or policing, but about sensing changes in emotional transparency. The woman who used to leave her phone on the kitchen table now keeps it face down or tucked away in her bag even when she's home. Passwords get changed, notifications silenced, text tone set to none. But more than the physical handling of devices, it's her attitude toward sharing that alters. She begins to tell fewer stories about her day or shares them in a vague, general way. The characters in her daily life, colleagues, friends, encounters, begin to recede into the background. You feel that she's editing, but you can't put your finger on what exactly has changed. This is a psychological retreat. Privacy is normal, we all have a right to it. But when a relationship is intimate and close, we tend to invite each other into the narrative of our lives without being prompted. When that stops happening, it may signal that she is creating an interior world that no longer includes you, or includes you only selectively, safely distanced. And this is where it becomes important for you not to panic, but to pay attention, to feel into the emotional texture of those conversations. Is she still present when she speaks? Does she still invite your curiosity? Or do you sense a quiet fencing off of parts of her life that used to feel open and shared? And the third hidden pattern, which often follows closely, is emotional disinvestment in small moments. I'm not talking about the grand gestures here, not the vacations or the anniversaries, because many women will keep up appearances even as their heart drifts. I'm talking about those quiet, in-between moments where intimacy breathes, the way she used to linger over morning coffee with you, ask about your dreams, laugh at your small jokes, notice your mood, and offer comfort. These moments begin to vanish. Instead, those moments are replaced by efficiency. Conversation becomes purely practical. Did you pay that bill? Can you pick up the groceries? Who's taking the kids tomorrow? It feels transactional, almost like you're business partners running a household rather than lovers sharing a life. This disinvestment is hard to name at first. It can even feel like you're imagining it, because outwardly everything might still look okay. She's still polite, still fulfills responsibilities, still smiles, reaches into the but the UNSEEN, and still doesn't her bugs the EYEPSISIN. The attentiveness has dimmed, and what's most telling is that she no longer seeks those unscheduled moments with you, the spontaneous hugs, the quiet check-ins, the lazy cuddles on the couch. Her energy is somewhere else. And whether she has acted on it physically or not, that energy has been redirected emotionally, and that is the threshold where infidelity begins, not with bodies, but with attention, curiosity, and care. So as we reflect on these first three patterns, withdrawal disguised as busyness, privacy shifts that alter emotional transparency, and disinvestment in micro moments, I want you to stay gentle with yourself. These are difficult things to feel. They can stir anxiety, resentment, even shame. But remember, this is not about blame. This is about observation, about tuning in, about recognizing where connection is thinning before it disappears completely. And as we continue, we're going to go even deeper into what happens next, because these patterns don't just stop here. When we start to pay attention to these subtle withdrawals, we begin to see how connection frays slowly, almost imperceptibly, until the relationship feels like two people inhabiting the same house, but living in different worlds. And here's where it becomes even more nuanced, where another hidden pattern quietly emerges, a pattern that's so easy to miss if you're only looking for concrete evidence of betrayal. This next pattern is what I call emotional outsourcing. Imagine this: she no longer shares the mundane frustrations of her day with you, the annoying colleague, the difficult meeting, the thing that made her laugh or made her feel seen. Instead, she starts to share those stories with someone else. Sometimes it's framed innocently, a friend from work, a good listener. She met through a hobby, even an old acquaintance who has resurfaced. It's easy to dismiss this at first, to think, well, she needs her own friendships too. And of course she does. But what matters here is not that she has confidants, it's what she chooses to give them. When a woman starts consistently seeking emotional validation outside the relationship, that's a quiet sign that her primary attachment is shifting. She may still live with you, eat with you, even laugh with you occasionally, but the emotional core of her life begins to orbit elsewhere. And that means that her frustrations, her joys, and most dangerously, her longings, are no longer shared with you, but with this other person who now holds a privileged space in her emotional landscape. You may notice this not because she says anything explicit, but because her mood seems regulated by something outside your relationship. She returns home looking lighter or more distracted, depending on what happened out there, and you're no longer the person who affects that state. This pattern can feel so ambiguous because there may be no physical infidelity at this point, nothing that crosses any obvious lines. But emotionally, a door is opening elsewhere, and doors opening elsewhere inevitably mean doors closing at home. And as this outsourcing deepens, another hidden pattern unfolds, a subtle devaluation of you as a partner. Again, this isn't loud. It doesn't necessarily take the form of criticism or arguments. In fact, it can look very quiet. She might stop noticing the things you used to do that made her happy. She no longer compliments you on small gestures. The thoughtfulness you bring, perhaps you still bring her a cup of tea in the evening, or you still remember the shows she likes, now goes largely unacknowledged. You feel invisible, like your efforts no longer land, and if you listen closely, you may notice small comments that reveal this shift. A comparison, perhaps. "Oh, he's so funny, he just gets me." Or a wistful sigh about how someone else really understands what I mean. These remarks seem casual, even harmless, but their cumulative effect is corrosive, because in those moments, what she's actually doing, consciously or not, is redefining her perception of you. She's reshaping the narrative of your relationship, so that you appear smaller in her mind, and this other connection feels larger. This devaluation is particularly painful because it can coexist with civility. She can still be polite. She can still perform the rituals of partnership, meals, errands, social events. But underneath there is a diminishing respect, a growing detachment. And it is this emotional downgrade that often precedes or accompanies physical infidelity. You might catch it in the way she reacts when you speak, her attention drifting more easily, her responses growing shorter, her eyes glazing over. Not because what you're saying is uninteresting, but because in her mind you are becoming less central to her emotional world. And as this devaluation takes root, it often leads to the next, even deeper pattern, the cultivation of a secret self. This is the phase where she begins to nurture an inner life that she does not share with you, fantasies, dreams, desires, plans. And while we all have private thoughts, this is different. This is about creating a version of herself that feels vibrant and alive precisely because it is hidden. You might notice that she's spending more time alone, scrolling on her phone late at night, taking walks where she used to invite you to join, listening to music with headphones in. But what's really happening is that she's building a psychological space where you are no longer a participant. In this private realm, she allows herself to explore fantasies of freedom, excitement, emotional fulfillment, sometimes centered around another person, sometimes simply centered around an imagined self who feels more alive away from the relationship. And here's the hard truth. Infidelity is rarely about you. It's often about her, about reclaiming a lost sense of self, about chasing vitality, about escaping from emotional numbness or monotony. But that doesn't make the pain of witnessing these patterns any less real. So what can you do when you sense this cultivation of a secret self? First, you can resist the urge to chase or control. Because if you try to demand entry into this space, it will only push her further away. Instead, what you can offer is presence, a genuine, open presence that invites her back not through interrogation, but through empathy and curiosity. Ask questions without an agenda, offer listening without judgment, create small moments of intimacy where she feels safe to share again. But also take care of your own dignity. These patterns are not an invitation to abandon yourself, respect or beg for scraps of attention. They are signals to become more attuned, more self-aware, and to decide what kind of connection you want, and whether she is still willing and able to meet you there. Because even when these patterns unfold, relationships can recover, healing is possible. But healing begins with awareness, not with accusation, but with seeing clearly what is happening beneath the surface. And now, as we gently stay with this theme, we arrive at one of the most profound yet misunderstood shifts that occurs in these situations, the transformation of desire itself. You see, desire is delicate, a fragile balance between familiarity and mystery. In long-term relationships, familiarity often wins out and mystery begins to fade when life gets difficult. When a woman is drifting, her desire can take on a different quality. It becomes hungry for novelty, for reflection of self in another's eyes, for validation she may no longer feel in the relationship. And this hunger begins to animate her behavior in ways you may feel but struggle to interpret. Her clothing choices might change subtly at first. A new style, a different attention to how she presents herself, but not necessarily for you. You notice that she dresses with care even when she's not going out with you, maybe for work, maybe for errands, but there's an intentionality you sense wasn't there before. And it isn't about vanity, it's about reclaiming a sense of aliveness. It's about imagining herself as desirable, seductive, vibrant. Sometimes this manifests as more flirtatious behavior in social settings, a new sparkle when she talks to others, an openness you sense more easily when she's interacting with someone else. And here's where it can feel so confusing for you. At home, she may seem distant, cold, distracted, yet outside. She can seem radiant, lively, alive. This is not necessarily malicious. It's often about contrast, the contrast between the mundane rhythms of life with you and the excitement of being seen anew by others. But it is still a pattern worth noticing because it reveals where her energy is being directed, where her vitality is finding expression. And in this phase, desire doesn't just mean physical attraction. It means emotional excitement. It means feeling admired, feeling pursued, feeling captivating. When that need is no longer being fed within the relationship, whether because you stopped offering it or because she stopped receiving it, she begins to unconsciously or consciously seek it elsewhere, and the most painful part is this: it isn't always about physical intimacy at first. Sometimes these moments of attention from others become a substitute for emotional intimacy with you. A glance, a compliment, a flirtatious text, they create small hits of validation that allow her to bypass deeper conversations with you. Conversations that might have been more difficult, but also more healing. This shift in where her desire lies is one of the clearest signs that something essential has changed. And as this dynamic deepens, another pattern begins to emerge, one that often leaves men feeling utterly bewildered. She starts rewriting the history of your relationship, not always out loud, but in her mind first. The story she tells herself about your relationship becomes darker, more critical, more dismissive. She focuses more on your failings than your kindnesses. She remembers more of what disappointed her than what delighted her. This revisionist history is not about truth, it's about justification. It's about creating an internal permission structure that allows her to continue detaching. I've been unhappy for years, she might start saying, even if this unhappiness has only recently become pronounced. You never really understood me, she might think, even though understanding was once the foundation of your bond. This rewriting isn't meant to hurt you. It's a way for her to make sense of her own disconnection, to soothe the guilt that might otherwise accompany her drift. But it hurts none the less, and it can manifest in subtle but unmistakable ways. Sarcastic comments where there used to be humor, distant agreement where there used to be passionate debate, lukewarm appreciation where there used to be deep gratitude. Her story about you is changing, and in that story, she is increasingly the protagonist seeking escape, and you are being cast as a secondary character who no longer excites or satisfies. The tragedy is that this story often takes root not because the relationship was irredeemable, but because both partners stopped tending to its garden. And here's the most important thing to understand. When a woman starts rewriting the story of your relationship, she's not necessarily rewriting it for you, she's rewriting it for herself. To give herself permission to emotionally or physically exit, to alleviate any cognitive dissonance she feels as she crosses the line between loyalty and longing. In this phase, your presence may no longer feel like a comfort to her. It may feel like a reminder of her dissatisfaction, a mirror in which she sees the parts of herself that she wants to leave behind, and that's why it becomes even more critical for you not to respond with accusation or defensiveness, but with grounded curiosity. To gently ask yourself, what story is she telling herself right now, and how does that story differ from the one we shared? Because if you want to understand what's happening beneath the surface, you must listen not only to her words, but to the narratives she's constructing about you, about herself, about your history. Together, this awareness is not meant to make you paranoid or insecure. It's meant to empower you with insight, so that you can decide with clarity and dignity how you wish to engage. Do you wish to challenge that story with compassion and honesty? Do you wish to invite a new narrative to be written together? Or do you recognize that her drift has reached a point where no amount of insight can bring her back? These are profound questions, and they can only be answered from a place of deep self-awareness and emotional maturity. And remember, you do not need to control her story in order to own your own. You can honor your experience even as hers changes. You can stay rooted in what you know about the love you've offered, the care you've given, and the man you choose to be, regardless of how she is now framing the past. This is the true power of emotional sovereignty, to remain connected to your own truth, even when another's perception is shifting in ways that hurt. And as we sit here together in this delicate space, tracing these hidden patterns, listening for what is often unspoken, I want to invite you to slow down even more, because this next pattern is perhaps the most intimate and the most confronting of all, the gradual erosion of emotional responsibility. When a woman begins to emotionally exit a relationship, she often relinquishes something that was once central to your bond, the care she used to take in managing your emotional world. Do you remember those times when she would check in gently, even when you didn't ask? When she would notice your silences, your fatigue, the tension in your shoulders, and offer a question or a touch that told you she was attuned to you. In the early stages of love, attunement feels effortless. She knew your moods before you did. She anticipated your needs without being told. But as she begins to emotionally detach, that attunement starts to slip away, and this is where it can become so confusing, because she may still show up outwardly. She may still go to events with you, still engage in the shared responsibilities of life, but the deeper thread, that subtle sense of being held emotionally, begins to fray. You might find yourself feeling lonelier than ever, even while sitting next to her on the couch. This shift is profound. Emotional responsibility is what separates a partner from a roommate. When she no longer feels invested in your inner world, when she no longer feels called to be a caretaker of your emotional state, it's a clear sign that her investment has shifted elsewhere, either inward into her own self-focus or outward into another attachment. This erosion of care often reveals itself in small ways. She stops asking how you really are, stops picking up on your emotional cues, becomes impatient with your vulnerabilities. Where there was once empathy, there is now a polite detachment. And this change can feel devastating because for many men, that subtle emotional tending is what creates their deepest sense of security and connection in a relationship, even more than physical affection, so you may find yourself hesitating to bring your feelings forward, sensing that they won't be met with the same warmth or curiosity as before. Or worse, that they'll be met with impatience or a sense that you are burdening her. This erosion is not always deliberate. Often she is caught in her own internal turmoil, wrestling with her own dissatisfaction, her own unmet needs, her own longing for something she may not even be able to name. But the effect is the same. You are left alone in the emotional space where once you felt held. And as this dynamic settles in, it often coincides with another hidden pattern, the subtle but undeniable shift in conflict dynamics. In a healthy relationship, Conflict, though difficult, can serve as a bridge back to connection. Arguments, disagreements, even frustrations, when held with care, can lead to greater understanding and closeness. But when a woman begins to emotionally check out, conflict takes on a different character. You may notice that disagreements which once mattered now feel muted or shrugged off. She no longer fights for resolution. She seems indifferent to outcomes. It may even feel as though she welcomes conflict as a way to justify further emotional distance. Alternatively, she may stop engaging in conflict altogether, not because all is well, but because she no longer feels that resolution is worth pursuing. Silence becomes her strategy, disengagement replaces dialogue. And this can be incredibly painful for you as a man, because you may find yourself chasing her emotionally, trying to spark a conversation, even provoking a fight just to get some engagement, some sense that she still cares enough to argue, but instead you're met with quiet withdrawal, a kind of cold neutrality that says, "I'm no longer invested in repairing this." This shift in conflict patterns is critical to notice. It's not that she has no feelings, far from it. It's that her feelings may have been redirected elsewhere, or they've settled into resignation. And what makes this so complex is that sometimes this withdrawal coexists with continued functionality. She might still parent alongside you, still make plans with friends, still manage logistics, but the emotional glue, the sense that conflict can be a portal back to intimacy, is gone. And this absence can feel like an abyss. You speak, but your words no longer seem to land. You reach out, but she no longer reaches back. This is where it becomes essential for you to pause and reflect, to ask yourself, is this relationship still a living system, or has it become a polite arrangement devoid of emotional vitality? It's a hard question, but it's a necessary one. Because as painful as it is to recognize these patterns, emotional outsourcing, devaluation, rewriting history, shifting desire, emotional withdrawal, conflict indifference, they offer clarity. And clarity, even when it hurts, is a gift. When you can see these signs clearly, you are no longer fumbling in the dark, wondering what went wrong, blaming yourself blindly, or feeling confused by her moods. You begin to understand that infidelity is not simply a betrayal. It is a symptom of emotional disconnection that has been growing for some time, often in small, almost invisible increments. And in this understanding, you reclaim your power, the power to respond not with reactivity, but with intention. The power to decide, from a place of dignity, how do I want to meet this moment? How do I want to meet myself in this moment? Because no matter what happens next, whether she chooses to return, whether she continues to drift, whether the relationship heals or dissolves, your relationship with yourself must remain intact. That is the foundation from which all other relationships flow. So here we are, sitting with all of this awareness. And perhaps you're already beginning to feel that this conversation isn't really about catching her in an act of betrayal. It's about something much more profound. It's about reclaiming your presence in the relationship, and more importantly, reclaiming your relationship with yourself. Because even when we lay bare these hidden patterns, the emotional withdrawal disguised as busyness, the secrecy that gently closes doors, the outsourcing of emotional validation, the diminishing of small gestures, the rewriting of history, we are not here to pathologize women, or shame them, or to weaponize this knowledge. We are here to understand, to see clearly. The final hidden pattern I want to speak about is perhaps the most subtle and the most difficult to name. It is the shift from partnership to parallel lives. At a certain point in this gradual detachment, a woman may still remain outwardly present. She may still live in the same home, participate in the same rituals, perform all the duties and roles that the relationship requires, but inwardly she is no longer there. Your lives begin to run side by side, no longer intersecting meaningfully. There may be no overt conflict, no dramatic revelations. In fact, it may look, from the outside, like everything is fine, but you feel it. You feel it in the absence of spontaneous joy. You feel it in the way your presence no longer seems to light her up. You feel it in the mechanical nature of conversations that used to have depth. And what's hardest about this final phase is that it often feels like there's nothing to fix. There's no clear event to point to, no clear wound to tend to. Only an accumulation of absence. And this is where so many men get stuck, in the hope that if they just wait long enough, if they just work harder, if they just perform their roles more perfectly, she will return emotionally. But relationships don't heal through perfectionism. They heal through presence, through curiosity, through vulnerability. And if she is no longer willing to meet you in that space, if her parallel life has become a sanctuary that excludes you, then you are faced with a decision. Will you continue to accept this quiet disconnection, or will you honor your own longing for connection, even if that means letting go? I know this is not easy. Love is not easy, but clarity is a kindness for her and for you. And if you find yourself recognizing these patterns in your own relationship, I want to offer this perspective. Infidelity is not the beginning of betrayal. It is the culmination of a series of small betrayals of presence, of curiosity, of emotional reciprocity, that have unfolded over time, often unnoticed. But just as disconnection accumulates, so too can reconnection if both people are willing. So as you take in everything we've spoken about today, I want you to gently reflect. Where have you stopped showing up fully? Where have you allowed patterns of detachment to set in, not just in her, but in yourself? And where do you need to reclaim your own energy, your own dignity, your own vitality, regardless of what she chooses next? Because at the heart of all of this is one simple truth: you deserve to feel seen, heard, and loved. Not tolerated, not accommodated, but cherished. And while these patterns we've explored may help you recognize when infidelity is taking shape, they are also an invitation to become more awake to yourself, more present to your own needs, more courageous in your own heart. So if you are feeling unseen, unloved, or neglected, let that awareness move you not into resentment or self-doubt, but into self-respect. Into asking different questions, into having different conversations, first with yourself, then with her if she is willing. And remember, relationships are not static, they evolve and sometimes they end. But the most important relationship, the one you have with yourself, must be tended to continuously, with love, clarity, and care. So before we finish, I want to say this: you are not alone in this. Many men feel lost when emotional drift sets in. Many struggle to name what they're feeling, to give shape to their loneliness, to trust their intuition when they sense something is off. But the very fact that you are here, listening, paying attention, this is a powerful first step. This is you choosing awareness over denial, dignity over confusion, love over fear. And if you carry one thing forward from this conversation, let it be this: your worth does not depend on her attention. Your value does not depend on her desire. Your dignity does not depend on her loyalty. You are worthy, whole, and enough, exactly as you are, whether she comes back to you emotionally, or whether this moment is the beginning of a different path for you. So as we close this conversation, I want to thank you for your presence, for your courage, for your curiosity. And I invite you, if this has resonated, to share your thoughts in the comments below. I read them carefully, and they help guide these conversations. And if you found value in this dialogue, I encourage you to like this video and subscribe to the Intimacy Lab, where we explore the deep and often unspoken dimensions of love, desire, betrayal, and reconnection. Here's to your courage, your clarity, and your commitment, not just to your relationships, but to your own growth as a man. Thank you for being here.